This book, this book is, it's everything. So I finished, this morning, I finished Before the Coffee Gets Cold by Toshikazu Kawaguchi. I had to practice it because I knew I was going to say it wrong, but I didn't. So, yay. Oh my gosh. This book is amazing. This little tiny book just is filled with so much goodness, so much truth, so much beauty. It is an absolutely charming book. So I'm going to do a quick review on this book. This is my first book review for YouTube, and I would not consider myself a booktuber. That is not what I am, but I love to read. I love to read. I love coffee shops. I love crocheting. I love doing a lot of different fun things. And I had decided to get back into reading, and this was the first book that I committed to choosing. And no matter what, I was going to read this book because I wanted to get back into my old habit of reading, because reading does so much for my soul. And during these crazy times that we're living in, I need, I need, dare I say, some chicken soup for my soul. Remember those books? I used to love the chicken soup books, and I know some people would think they were corny, and some people, probably think that they were gimmicky, but for me, I love a good, heartwarming, wholesome book experience. So, yeah, this was kind of like that. Um, so I'll get into it. I'll get into it. If you know me, if you've been around my channel for even 5 minutes, you know I love a good coffee shop. You know that coffee shops are just my second home. They're my place to be. It's where I people watch. It's where I dream. It's where I read books. It's where I create. And I'm not partial to just one type of coffee shop. I can pretty much, if it's a clean coffee shop, if they have good coffee, if the atmosphere is giving, chill vibes, I'm there. I love a good coffee shop. I love a pretty coffee shop. I love a cozy coffee shop. I love coffee shops in the winter. So it should be no surprise to anyone that I would want to read this book. I also have to kind of preface this video by saying that coffee shops are so near and dear to me that I have made tons of friends through going to coffee shops. Like, some of the best people I know were either baristas or they hung out in coffee shops. So that is definitely a place where I have gone to network, where I've gone to, you know, where I've gone to network, where I've gone to create, where I've gone to build bonds with people in the community. Um, I've I've even we've even had spontaneous game nights in our coffee shop in the past before COVID. Of course, since the C word, everything has changed. But before that, it was definitely my place. And it was definitely a place where I have met some of the best people. And when I say that, I mean, I have lived all over the country, I have moved countless times. And the thing that has always been a staple is a coffee shop, usually a Starbucks, because Starbucks is consistent. And you need that when you move out of, or when you travel out of the country, when you move out of the country, or when you travel out of the country, or when you are moving to a new state and you don't know anybody. It is just one of the best places to go to find out about the community you live in, to meet people, especially people who have lived there. A lot of the times you meet a lot of younger people, which is its own vibe in itself. And it's how you build bonds, at least how I have built bonds moving from place to place to place. I have built more bonds with people that I've met in coffee shops than I have with people that I've met at work or church, or even that have lived in, have been neighbors. I know the people in the coffee shop better than I know my neighbors. Let that sink in. So, the idea of a book set in a coffee shop, you already had me sold. You had me at hello, baby. You had me at hello. Um, And this one has a mystical side to it, which is very interesting. So before the coffee gets cold, I will just sum it up really quickly because I've already been babbling way too much. It's about a coffee shop where if you sit in this one particular seat, you can time travel and you have the option of going to whatever time you would like to go to and correct something or do something or say something that you didn't say in the past, or see something that you want to see, basically. So um, it gives you the opportunity to have a second chance, and in some cases, a first chance, but I'm not going to spoil anything for you guys. Whew, it's hot. But there are rules. There are rules. And the rules are pretty frustrating for the people who want to do this time traveling thing. So it's not like everyone's lining up to sit in the seat and time travel, because the rules are pretty, strict on this whole strict for this whole time traveling thing. Um, and there are consequences to breaking the rules. And so again, that is something I'm not going to spoil for you, but the idea that you could go back and just talk to someone in the past sounds so intriguing. And yet, as with anything in life, it's not easy. Now, why this I think is really near and dear to my heart is because, as you know, like I said, I have a love for coffee shops. Coffee shops have been my thing for a very long time. And I also had a friend who I met in a coffee shop a few years back, who we became really close in a very short time. And unfortunately, she passed away. And in the coffee shop that I used to go to where I met her, there's a little plaque that has her name on it in memory of her. And no lie, speaking of mystical coffee shops, after COVID, because I stopped going to the coffee shop for a long time because she passed away before the pandemic. Um, I'm wanting to say the year before, but yeah, the year before the pandemic, she passed away. And so that next year we had quarantine, and it had been a couple of years before I had started to frequent this coffee shop again. In fact, started frequenting I just recently started frequenting this coffee shop again. And when I first started going back, one of the things that, happened when we first opened up was that we social distanced. They're just words. I am smarter than the words. We social distanced, and because we did that, the seating was spread apart. But her seat, her name is Pat. Pat's seat, was there, and they had a table at Pat's seat and a chair, and then they social distanced about 6 feet, and then the next table and chair, and there's a long bench. You get the idea. And then they had other chairs and tables. So only about, three people or three sets of two could sit in on the bench. And then, of course, there were chairs in other places. Um, and a lot of times when you would go in, even before they finally put all the chairs and tables back and nobody's wearing masks now or whatever, you would go in, you couldn't get a seat because people would take all the seats. And no lie, at least two times, maybe even a third, I had gone in there and I wanted to sit. And it's kind of a drive for us because there's no real coffee shops. And I say that loosely. They're here, but they're just not places that I want to really go. There are no real coffee shops where I am. So I drive a little further to go to this one. And when I would go, it'd be crowded. And then I'd be like, oh, but I really want to sit in here, especially on rainy days or cold days. So we had gone in there a couple of times, and my daughter was there with me at least two of the times, so she's my witness. And no lie, it would be crowded and we'd be standing. And usually, before we got our food or before we were ready to sit down or leave and go somewhere else, a seat would open up, but not just any seat. Pat's seat would open up. Pat's seat would open up. It was almost as if she was making the person who was sitting in her seat leave so that I or my daughter and myself could have her seat. So when I go to that coffee shop, I always have a seat. And that makes me feel so good. I miss Pat a lot, but I feel like she is with me all the time, especially when I go back to the coffee shop. And I almost didn't go back there. And now I'm glad that I still do. Because when I go, I feel like I'm getting to spend some time with my friend. So that's just a little backstory. So already this is near and dear to my heart, but this is good, and I'm going to tell you why. Let's get into the review. I initially thought that I was going to get my review up on Monday. I was so excited to review this book that I didn't even think about formatting or really even what I wanted to say. I just wanted to like talk about the book. That's probably why in the first part of this video, I said coffee shop like a million times. I'm so sorry for that. I went back and watched it and I was like, wow, I was annoying myself. So here on out, I'll just say cafe. How about that? I've had some time to think about how I want to format things, and I think we're just going to talk about the 5 things I liked about the book, the lessons I learned from the book, and my biggest takeaway from this book. I think that would be the perfect way to sum things up. And of course, while I do that, I'll do also the thing that I do every morning, my skincare routine. I'm just spraying the Glossier's Soothing Face Mist. It's rose water. It smells divine, but it has the worst pump. I don't know, something about it that drives me nuts. Anyway, let's get into the review. So, the 5 things I loved about this book. So the first thing that I loved about this book was that the cafe is the main character of the book. It just is. And I feel as though when I watched reviews or read reviews, some people really missed out on that very obvious fact. The place itself, it's what's magical. It's the people are supporting actors to the cafe itself. The cafe is described constantly throughout the book. And yet, I feel as though the author is just trying to subtly tell you that it is truly a magical place and that interesting things and wonderful things can happen there. I love it when a place or an object or a setting is also a character. That is something that I just love. Or a city. I especially love it when a city is a character in a book or a movie. It's just the coolest thing ever. So that's the first thing I love. The second thing that I loved is that no character in this book is insignificant. There are times when you will read a story or even watch a movie and they'll throw in a random character for whatever reason. And that character does nothing to move the story along. Sometimes they might say something significant or they might do something significant, but they don't really fit into the story. I see that a lot in books and movies. In this book, every character has a purpose. No random characters were introduced, and because the characters had a purpose and because the characters were the supporting actors in the cafe and moved the story along, they to me became very interesting. To piggyback off of the second thing that I liked, the third thing that I liked is that the characters themselves were normal people. They were working people, ordinary people who were just going about their day-to-day lives and happened to find themselves either being customers of the cafe or working in the cafe. And their lives it seems as though their lives brought them there. Almost as if the cafe discovered them and pulled them in. Nobody was trying to be heroic. Nobody was trying to save the world. It's a story about people just living their day-to-day. I find that very refreshing because oftentimes we want to give a person a purpose in a story or make them do extraordinary things. And what's wrong with just being a person who's living their lives, who's just going through their normal day-to-day with their normal daily thoughts, living their lives, and just being people. I don't know, it's something about that I just love. Characters in books don't have to be fantastical. They don't have to be altruistic. They don't have to be overly moral. They don't have to have some sort of political stance. Sometimes they can just be. The fourth thing that I like is how the story is interwoven. There are 4 separate parts to this particular book, which is part of a series. I learned that when I was doing my research on this book, and there are 4 parts, but these stories are interwoven and they're done so deftly and so seamlessly that you really do have to kind of take a step back and admire the craftsmanship of the author, I think. Especially because it's a simple story. It's written in simple language. And it wouldn't be a better story if it were written in flowery language, or if it had these characters that were doing all of these things. And I will say my review is colored by some other reviews that I've read, because it seems to me that sometimes people wanted these characters to do more. They wanted them to be something different, and they wanted the language to be this flowery language. And there is a place for that in books, but I like to read books where the people talk like I talk, where they just have everyday conversation. Sometimes I can be cerebral and I could use a lot of, $20 words, and I can speak very eloquently. A lot of people have the ability to do that. But when you're hanging out with your friends, or you're with people that you're familiar with, call it the code switch if you want to, most people are not walking around speaking in Shakespearean English. Most people are just simply speaking the way they speak with their friends, with the people they're familiar with, in a place where they feel comfortable. And I felt like this novel, or this book being translated from Japanese, did that very well. It was very simple, real human stories, and the author told them in real simple human ways. And I love that. It makes the book very easy to read. It makes the book very easy to get into. So if you're looking for a book that is very easy to read and that pulls you in immediately, doesn't bog you down with a bunch of extra unnecessary language, and just has a very simplistic way of telling the story, I think you will love this book. The fourth thing that I loved about this book is it's very descriptive. It describes what the characters are wearing, and it describes it as a part of their personality and as a part of who they are. The author talks about the setting, the cafe. We see that description throughout the book, but you also see the description of what people are wearing, and when people are not wearing what they would normally wear, and how that speaks to where they may have been, or maybe it's their day off. Or I love that. I love those little nuances that let you know that, very subtly, again, in my opinion, that, hey, this person is doing something out of the ordinary, or this person is doing, what they normally do. Oh, they're wearing their uniform, so they must be going to work. I liked those descriptions. It also spoke to their personality. How the people dressed actually was a very subtle way of letting you know who they were. And I liked that. And I don't know if I've ever really noticed that in books before. I probably have, I'm sure I have. I know that it's something that authors use. They will use a hairstyle, or they will use posture or demeanor to depict a person's personality, or whether they're doing something out of the norm or not. But in this book, it's very noticeable for me, and I managed to take note of it quite a bit. And I love that about this book. I love that that's how the author chose to show you the differences in the personalities of people, in their demeanor, in their stations in life. I like that. Very well done. And the last thing that I loved about this book was how it really does just pull you into the story. When it first starts off, you're getting to know the characters, and so it could be slightly irritating because you're trying to figure out, like, why is this one character so intense, or why is this one character not intense enough? Like, these are all things that you encounter upon initially starting the book. But that slight irritation, that slight rub against the norm, that is what pulls you into the story. It's what made me want to read more, like, what is going on with this person? And sometimes it's just simply that it was a person who was high strung. So for me, that was good to know too. And it's good to know because it's, in a way, a little bit of foreshadowing. The foreshadowing in this book was both annoying and good at the same time for me, because sometimes I don't like foreshadowing, because the foreshadowing will tell you what's happening in the book. And if you're very sensitive or you're very intuitive, you're going to pick up on it immediately. And so I did. So I kind of knew what was going to happen by the end of the book, but the author still managed to surprise me. And that was worth cracking open the book in the first place. Lessons I learned from this book. I learned three. The first lesson that I learned is that we shouldn't assume things. There was a lot of assumption in this book because people weren't communicating, which is really lesson number two, one and two together. We have to communicate with each other. Sometimes we assume a lot of things in interpersonal relationships, and we don't say what we really need to say because, we think that we know what the person is thinking or what they're going to do or what they've done. And in all honesty, all we had to do is ask. So that's the first lesson. And it's not even a lesson that I've learned. I think it's just a takeaway from this book. I have always been someone who understands that assuming things usually can send you down the wrong path. And it doesn't typically help out any interpersonal situation. So yeah, that would be the first takeaway. The second takeaway or lesson, as I mentioned, is communication. If you got to say something, say it. If you need to say something to someone, you need for someone to do something, especially people that you claim to love, say it, do it, show it, prove it. Okay, my Gen Xers will know what that is. Oh, a little in vogue humor. But seriously, you have to be able to communicate. We have to. And I feel like that is the downfall of a lot of relationships. And I feel like that is said over and over again. And honestly, people still don't get it. And the third lesson is that even in simple situations, even in just normal, everyday, mundane situations, although the coffee shop is very mystical, even in those situations, a person can grow. There's always a chance for a second chance. And sometimes you even have to take a first chance. Don't be afraid to take a chance and see what happens. In this case, it was the cafe where, sitting in the seat and being transported to another time was really taking a chance because there's so many rules. And, if these characters weren't careful, it could be of grave detriment. So sometimes you have to take a chance, and sometimes you have to take a second chance, and sometimes you get a second chance, and it's all about growth. All of the characters grew in some way. Most of them learned to not assume, which is a big thing with people, and I think that was one of the big things that the author wanted to say. Like, don't assume things. And I think in the book, he lets you into the mind, into the inner monologues of people, which I actually love that. Some people don't, but I do. And he gives you those inner monologues so that you understand what these people are thinking. And honestly, they learn very quickly that just because you were thinking it and just because you thought that this was the way that it was doesn't mean that it really was. So those are my lessons that I've learned from the book, and those are the things that I love from the book. There was only one thing that I didn't like, and I don't really like to talk about things that I don't like, but in this case I will, because it was so insignificant and it was such a me thing. I don't know if it's the translation or if it's just the way the author writes, but the word muttered was used a lot. Like, it would say like, oh, this character muttered or that character muttered, and I've come to the realization that I don't really care for that word. And it did appear periodically throughout the book, maybe a little bit more than I would have liked. That is totally a personal thing. It is a silly thing. And it's a quirk that I have to deal with. It has nothing to do with the author or the book or any of that. But when I read books, when I watch movies, if I don't like something, it's usually something subtle like that. I truly believe in accepting the story for what it is and not judging it, period, you know. And I know for a lot of people, we infuse our own personalities into what we read and our own experiences into what we read. And of course, I do too, but I make the effort to not judge the story, to just accept it for what it is. It's like, oh, well, that's what happened. Interesting. Because oftentimes in life, things happen and you can't go back and change them. And that is a huge part, a huge takeaway if you've been listening of this book. Sometimes you can't change things, but you can still grow from the experience. Last thing that I'm going to say about this lovely book is that there was a bit of a surprise for me because one of the characters, I really saw myself in her, or I don't know, she just reminded me of me, and that rarely happens when I read a book. I'm going to read a passage of this book to you because it resonated with me so much, and it's how I feel. It's how I feel about living my soft life. It's how I feel about bringing content to my subscribers, and how I feel like in a lot of ways my job is, or my purpose here is to just bring this message of how life doesn't have to be a struggle, how we can be peaceful, how we can be happy, how we can appreciate the little things. The message of gratitude and grace. And I've learned that although I'm human and people can rub me the wrong way sometimes, and not everybody thinks the way that I do or feels the way that I do, that it's not my place to judge anyone. It's not my place to judge people's choices or their preferences or any of that. It's just to be a conduit of love and peace and joy and happiness and creativity. The character Katsu, she is the pourer of the coffee. She is the one who facilitates the time travel. And other than facilitating the time travel and sort of just being a constant fixture in the cafe, she is more of an observer in a lot of ways. She sinks into the background most of the time because she believes that her job is to pour the coffee. Don't mind what's going on back there. I am cleaning out that closet, by the way. I'm getting rid of a lot of stuff, so bear with me. But here's a passage from this book that describes Katsu and in a lot of ways describes me. Katsu's drawings were hyper-realistic. Using only pencils, she created works that appeared as true to life as actual photographs, but she could only draw things she could observe herself. Her drawings never depicted the imaginary or the invented. People don't see things and hear things as objectively as they might think. The visual, let me turn this around a little bit. Oh, such a mess in here. I'm sorry, y'all. The visual and auditory information that enters the mind is distorted by experiences, thoughts, circumstances, wild fancies, prejudices, preferences, knowledge, awareness, and countless other workings of the mind. Pablo Picasso's sketch of a nude man that he did at age 8 is remarkable. The painting he did at age 14 of a Catholic communion ceremony is very realistic, but later, after the shock of his best friend's suicide, he created paintings in the shades of blue, and that became known as the Blue Period. Then he met a new lover and created the bright and colorful works of the Rose Period. Influenced by African sculptures, he became part of the Cubist movement. Then he turned to a neoclassical style, continued on to Surrealism, and eventually painted the famous works The Weeping Woman and Guernica. Taken together, these artworks show the world as seen through Picasso's eyes. They are the result of something passing through the filter that is Picasso. Until now, Katsu had never sought to challenge or influence people's opinions or behavior. This was because her own feelings didn't form part of the filter through which she interacted with the world. Whatever happened, she tried not to influence it by keeping herself at a safe distance. That was Katsu's place. It was her way of life. This was how she treated everyone. Her cool disposition when handling customers wishing to go back to the past was her way of saying, your reasons for going back to the past are none of my business. But this time was different, but this was different. And I won't read anymore because that would be giving away a few tidbits. But I do feel in a lot of ways I am like Katsu. And it's just my job to bring the information, be the catalyst, not judge people for their choices or what they, choose to do. But we also see an evolution in Katsu. I will guarantee after she does what she does in the next portion of what I was reading, in the next portion or the next passage, she will see life differently. And yet she will probably still be a facilitator. If anything, I think she will have more understanding. So while I do believe that I grow, I also do believe that it's very important to not color what I see all the time with my experiences, although I'm kind of doing it here by relating to Katsu in the story. But I think it's just because her character resonates with me so much, and I feel she portrays what I believe is symbolic of what I do here on this channel by bringing information and just basically trying to help people live their best lives, however that looks. It's not up to me to tell you how to do it. It's just up to me to give you the information. So that's it for my review. I hope that last part made sense. It's just very odd for me to resonate with a character like that. Usually I can read the characters and just accept them for who they are. I've said that. But in this case, I feel I related to that whole passage so much, even the part about Picasso, because what we do go through, it changes us. But at the same time, we still have to allow people to feel their feelings and to do things that they feel like they need to do. And a lot of the times we just need to be helpful. So that's it for this book. I love the book. I give it 5 out of 5 stars. And, and I encourage you to read it. I will be reading the next one in the series, hopefully, if, as they say, the Lord says the same and the creek don't rise. I will be reading the next 2 in the series because this was a delightful book, and I'm pretty sure the others are as well. So on that note, I will love you, and I will leave you, and I will see you in the next one.